The office was unusually quiet when Eliza Quill first noticed the subtle anomalies in the communication logs. A misplaced time stamp here, an oddly phrased memo, they're little things that didn't quite align with the usual bureaucratic humdrum. But as she delved deeper into the dusty archives, the truth unfolded like a taut string unraveling a knot. Harold Pindle, the steadfast supervisor whose allegiance to protocol was as legendary as his obsession with unicorn parking permits, had been quietly negotiating with the auditor's faction. Eliza sat alone under the flickering glow of the archive room's fluorescent lights, the stale scent of aged paper thick in the air. Her fingers, ink-stained and steady, traced the lines of coded correspondence that hinted at Harold's near defection. Each word was a dagger of disbelief. How could the man who policed every comma and dash in their absurd licenses contemplate betraying the Bureau's very mission? The revelation hit the Bureau like a thunderclap. Rumors spread fast through the labyrinthine corridors lined with filing cabinets stuffed with permits for impossibilities. Mythic, with her riot of brightly colored hair and infectious enthusiasm, was the first to transform shock into action. She commandeered the main office, a space usually filled with the relentless tap of typewriters and the murmur of meticulous clerks, turning it into a vibrant stage for protest. Banners with slogans like "Embrace the absurd" and "Chaos is bureaucracy's best friend" fluttered amid the clatter. Myra's voice rose above the din, rallying her colleagues with a mix of whimsy and fierce resolve. The usually subdued clerks found themselves swept up in a wave of energy that defied the sterile rules they'd lived by. Meanwhile, Harold found himself cornered in the quiet of the conference room. His slicked back grey hair seemed uncharacteristically disheveled under the weight of his conscience. Facing Eliza's unwavering gaze, he was a man stripped bare of his usual defenses. The absurdly oversized clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, each second an echo of his fractured loyalty. "I never meant to harm the Bureau," he confessed quietly, voice trembling. "I believed the auditor's vision of order was right, but I was wrong. I see now that without nonsense, there is no life." Eliza's disappointment was palpable, but beneath it lay a flicker of understanding. The Bureau was built on contradictions, order and chaos entwined in a delicate dance. Harold's misstep was a painful reminder of their shared humanity amid the madness. Outside, Juno Sparks documented the unfolding drama with her ever-present camera. The clicks of her shutter punctuated the chorus of chants and laughter, capturing the Bureau's moment of reckoning. Her investigative reports would soon stir public debate, spotlighting the absurd institution's struggle to balance regulation with freedom. Felix Grimble, the eccentric archivist, watched the protest with a bemused smile, colorful bow ties slightly askew. "Sometimes," he mused aloud to a passing clerk, "you need a little chaos to find your way back to order." As the protest crescendoed, the Bureau's rigid policies began to crack, and the clerks faced a choice: cling to the brittle certainties of the past, or embrace the unpredictable future that Myra's movement heralded. The lines had been crossed, and the dance between order and absurdity was poised to enter a new, exhilarating phase. The chapter closes on Eliza standing at her desk, gazing out at the bustling protest with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The quiet hum of the Bureau was forever changed, and so were its people. Somewhere between betrayal and renewal, the Bureau of Absurd Affairs found a heartbeat messy, vibrant, and undeniably alive. And just maybe, that was the point. The humming of the absurdity machines was a dull roar in the cavernous chamber beneath the Bureau of Absurd Affairs, where light flickered intermittently from fractured bulbs overhead. Eliza Quill stood motionless, her ink-stained fingers loosely clutching a time-travel license that seemed to pulse with a quiet urgency. Her short-cropped dark hair caught stray beams of light as she adjusted her glasses, eyes narrowing against the dimness. Across from her, the auditor stood a stoic figure clad in a perfectly tailored black suit, their face obscured behind a mirrored mask that reflected Eliza's own image back at her. The silence between them was thick, pregnant with unspoken truths and the weight of years. Eliza, the auditor's voice was smooth yet cold, echoing softly in the chamber. You've come far since the days when misplaced Tuesdays nearly unraveled this entire bureau. Eliza's breath caught. That day was etched into her memory, a chaotic blur of temporal dissonance and bureaucratic collapse. She remembered the frantic shouts, the endless reams of paperwork, and the sinking feeling that the rules they enforced were as fragile as the nonsense they sought to regulate. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, voice steady despite the tension coiling in her chest. "After all, you left the bureau for a reason." The auditor's mirrored masks seemed to shimmer, distorting their reflection. "I left because the bureau became a prisoner cage of contradictions. You cling to chaos wrapped in red tape, but I seek a future where reason prevails." Eliza's gaze sharpened. And what of creativity, imagination, the very essence of nonsense? "Imagination is a luxury that order cannot afford," the auditor replied flatly. "Your so-called absurdity threatens progress. It is my mission to cleanse this city of the distractions that impede true advancement." For a moment, the only sound was the low hum of the machines, their erratic flickers casting fractured shadows on the concrete walls. Then Eliza found her voice, quoting softly, "The truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable." The auditor tilted their head, intrigued. "Vonnegut, a philosopher of the absurd," Eliza replied with a faint smile. "He understood the delicate dance we perform here between order and chaos, logic and nonsense." The conversation veered into memories of a day when misplaced Mondays had thrown the bureau into disarray. A catastrophic event that had driven the auditor to sever ties and embrace radical logic. Eliza recalled how that incident had fractured their shared vision, setting them on opposing paths. "You fear chaos, but you also fear the freedom it offers," the auditor stated. "You enforce rules you secretly wish to break." Eliza's eyes flickered with conflicted emotion. "Perhaps, but without some order, nonsense becomes destructive. We manage the impossible to protect reality's fragile balance." "Or perhaps," the auditor countered, "you fear losing control." The air thickened, charged with the gravity of their ideological clash. Outside the chamber, the bureau's fluorescent-lit offices buzzed with the clatter of typewriters and murmurs of clerks navigating their daily absurdities. Here, in this hidden sanctuary, two visions for the future collided, a battle not just of policies, but of philosophies. After a long pause, the auditor stepped closer, the mirrored mask reflecting Eliza's resolute face. "You must decide, Eliza. Will you uphold a fading order or embrace the chaos that defines us?" Her heart pounded, the weight of their shared history pressing upon her. The bureau's fate and, perhaps the very fabric of nonsense itself, hinged on her choice. As the auditor turned and vanished into shadow, Eliza lingered, the echoes of their confrontation reverberating in her mind. She traced a finger over the license in her hand, the edges worn from years of handling. Somewhere between the rigid lines of regulation and the wild contours of absurdity lay a new path. Returning to the bustling office floor, Eliza found herself surrounded by the familiar cacophony of bureaucratic madness, papers shuffled, phones ringing, and Myra's whimsical doodles brightening the grey walls. The dance between order and chaos continued, and Eliza felt the stirrings of change within her. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, ready to face the uncertainty ahead. The auditor's gambit had been laid bare, but the game was far from over. In the heart of the Bureau of Absurd Affairs, the future waited poised between the cold logic of eradication and the hopeful absurdity of imagination. And Eliza Quill would choose the next move. The air inside the Bureau of Absurd Affairs was thick with a peculiar tension, the kind that seems to settle just before a storm of the impossible. Felix Grimble, the Bureau's archivist, sat hunched over a cluttered desk in the depths of the archive room, surrounded by towering piles of dusty files and faded permits. His colorful bow tie bobbed rhythmically as he hummed an old tune, fingers riffling through brittle paper with surprising dexterity. It was an ordinary day by the Bureau's standards, yet beneath the surface, a tempest was brewing. Felix's eccentricity was well known, a retired magician turned bureaucrat whose forgetfulness was only rivaled by his uncanny ability to find exactly what was needed in the most chaotic of messes. But today, his usual scatterbrained demeanor was sharpened by a flicker of recognition. Tucked away in the farthest corner of the archive, behind stacks of misplaced paperwork, was a narrow drawer etched with faded gold lettering, "Arcane Anomalies." Felix's heart quickened as he slid it open, revealing a collection of ancient scrolls, cryptic diagrams, and a peculiar assortment of objects that seemed to hum with latent energy. Eliza Quill, the lead clerk, known for her wry pragmatism and ink-stained fingers, entered quietly, drawn by the soft glow emanating from the drawer. Mythic, with her vibrant hair and mismatched clothes, trailed behind, clutching her ever-present sketchbook. They exchanged curious glances as Felix pulled out a thin, weathered tome bound in worn leather. "I thought the misplaced Mondays were simply a clerical nightmare," Felix said, adjusting his spectacles, "but it seems there's a deeper, more magical root to this chaos." Eliza raised an eyebrow. "Magic, Mr. Grimble? I thought we left that kind of nonsense to the realm of metaphor." Felix chuckled, a warm, conspiratorial sound. "Ah, but nonsense is our business, isn't it? I must confess, before I joined this bureau, I was something of a magician myself, not the sort who pulls rabbits from hats, but one who understood the delicate dance between reality and the impossible." Myra's eyes sparkled with excitement. "You mean like real magic?" "Indeed," Felix nodded, "and it's precisely this forgotten knowledge that may help solve our current predicament." Over the next hours, Felix demonstrated subtle sleights of hand that produced shimmering, glowing calendar pages, each flickering through days and weeks. These ethereal pages revealed glimpses of the lost Mondays, trapped in temporal limbo, days that never quite arrived, suspended in a bureaucratic purgatory. Harold Pindle, the ever-anxious supervisor with his slicked-back grey hair and oversized spectacles, arrived just in time to witness the spectacle. His face twitched with a mix of disbelief and unease. "This is highly irregular," he muttered, adjusting his ill-fitting suit. "Magic has no place in protocol." Felix smiled gently. "Sometimes, Harold, the rigidity of protocol must bend to accommodate the unpredictable. These misplaced Mondays are not mere errors. They are disruptions in the fabric of our regulated nonsense. The ancient rituals I learned involve a precise balance, a blend of order and chaos." The room filled with a hum of anticipation as Felix prepared a makeshift ritual circle in the Bureau's break room, repurposing discarded forms and bureaucratic stamps as arcane symbols. Eliza and Myra stood nearby, their skepticism softening into cautious hope. Harold hovered at the edge, torn between his fear of change and the undeniable efficacy of Felix's methods. Felix began the incantation, a strange melody that wove through the fluorescent-lit office, mingling with the rustle of papers and the faint clacking of keyboards. The air thickened with surreal energy as glowing symbols danced across the walls, and the misplaced Mondays began to coalesce, shimmering into tangible forms. Minutes felt like hours as the bureau held its collective breath. Then, with a final flourish, Felix's ritual sealed the lost days back into the temporal flow, restoring balance. The crisis averted, a wave of relief and exhilaration washed over the clerks. "Remarkable," Eliza murmured, her cynical armor cracking. "Perhaps there is room for a little magic in our order after all." Myra grinned, already sketching the glowing calendar page in her notebook. Harold, still adjusting his spectacles, nodded slowly, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. Felix's forgotten magic had not only saved the bureau from collapse, but had reignited its belief in the possibilities that lay at the intersection of absurdity and bureaucracy. As the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, the clerks of the Bureau of Absurd Affairs began to envision a future where creativity and regulation danced hand in hand. A future where nonsense was not just managed, but embraced. Yet, even as the misplaced Mondays settled back into their rightful place, a question lingered in the air. How could the Bureau integrate this rediscovered magic into its rigid framework, without unraveling the delicate balance they had fought so hard to maintain? The answer, much like the Bureau itself, remained tantalizingly elusive, waiting to be uncovered amid the swirling chaos of absurdity. And so, with hopeful hearts and bemused smiles, the clerks prepared to face whatever new impossibilities tomorrow might bring, their world forever altered by the forgotten magic of Felix Grimble. The city square was alive with an unusual energy that morning. Around the worn stone fountain, a gathering had formed, but this was no ordinary crowd. Amid the usual hustle of urban life, a vibrant swirl of color and sound burst forth. Hand-painted signs bobbed in the air, each emblazoned with slogans that were equal parts bureaucratic jargon and playful nonsense. "Permit the absurd," one read. Another declared, "Chaos is the new order." At the heart of this spontaneous uprising stood Mirror Talk, her bright hair a beacon among the throng, her mismatched clothes fluttering in the spring breeze. Clutched in her hands was a sketchbook, its pages filled with whimsical creatures and impossible machines. She lifted her voice, clear and unwavering, as the crowd echoed her chants in gleeful unison. The scene was a celebration of absurdity itself, a deliberate, creative rebellion against the rigid strictures that had long defined the Bureau of Absurd Affairs. Back inside the Bureau's fluorescent-lit corridors, the atmosphere was far more subdued, but no less charged. Eliza Quill sat behind her cluttered desk, her fingers ink-stained from hours of paperwork. Her gaze drifted away from the temporal paradox forms to a doodle left on a scrap of paper, Myra's handiwork. A clock with melting numbers dancing across the page in a carefree jig. The image stirred something inside Eliza, a quiet challenge to her long-held skepticism. Around her, the steady hum of office chatter and the clatter of keyboards filled the air. But her mind was elsewhere, turning over the possibilities that chaos might hold. Meanwhile, Juno Sparks prowled the edges of the protest, camera slung over her leather-jacketed shoulder. Her sharp eyes caught every detail, the earnest faces of the protesters, the clever signs, the palpable tension between the desire for order and the call for creative freedom. Juno's voice, clipped and incisive, carried over the crowd as she conducted interviews, capturing voices that ranged from hopeful idealism to wary pragmatism. Her report would soon ripple through the city's consciousness, stirring debate and forcing the public to confront the strange necessity of the bureau they had long regarded with bemused frustration. In stark contrast, Harold Pindle sat hunched in his cramped office, surrounded by towering stacks of unicorn parking permit forms. His slicked-back grey hair was disheveled, oversized spectacles slipping down his nose as he muttered corrections under his breath. Each new email about the protests or Juno's expos sent a ripple of anxiety through him. The rules he had devoted his life to upholding now seemed under siege. Yet, beneath his resistance, a small, reluctant part of him began to acknowledge the shifting tides. As days passed, Mira's movement gathered momentum. The bureau's halls echoed with whispers of change clerks, who once clung firmly to procedure, found themselves questioning the very foundations of their work. Eliza, in particular, felt the stirrings of transformation. She began to see the unpredictable nature of nonsense not as a threat, but as an essential facet of the bureau's existence. Her conversations with Myra grew more open, their debates a blend of pragmatism and whimsy that breathed new life into the office. Juno's articles painted the bureau in vivid hues of satire and admiration, exposing its absurdities while highlighting the human need for such an institution. The public response was electric, a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and support that mirrored the complex emotions within the bureau itself. Harold remained torn, but found himself drawn into policy discussions that sought to balance structure with flexibility, a delicate dance between order and chaos that no one had dared attempt before. By the chapter's end, the Bureau of Absurd Affairs was no longer merely a place of rules and paperwork. It had become a crucible of change, where the art of absurdity was not only acknowledged but embraced. The characters stood on the brink of a new era, their roles evolving as the lines between bureaucracy and creativity blurred. Eliza's newfound openness hinted at future transformations, while Myra's infectious enthusiasm promised continued disruption. As the sun set behind the city skyline, the bureau's fluorescent lights flickered softly, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in time with the possibilities ahead. The story of nonsense regulation was far from over. In fact, it had just begun its most unpredictable chapter yet. Perhaps, Eliza mused quietly to herself, the true absurdity lies not in the nonsense we regulate, but in our resistance to it. And with that thought, the dance between order and chaos continued, inviting all who dared to join. The conference room buzzed with a delicate energy, neither wholly chaotic nor comfortably ordered. Sunlight slanted through the dusty blinds, scattering golden bars across the cluttered table beneath which legal parchments sprawled in disarray. Carl Tannen, the Bureau's legal architect, stood at the head of the table, his fingers dancing with a worn marker on the whiteboard. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and paper, interspersed with the faint scent of Myra Tock's brightly colored ink from her ever-present sketchbook. Now, Carl began, voice steady but animated, we need to rethink these regulations, not just tweak, but fundamentally reimagine them. Our current framework is, how shall we say it, strangling the very essence of what we regulate. Harold Pindle sat stiffly, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his spectacles reflecting the chaotic scrawl on the board. I fail to see how relaxing rules will help maintain order, he said, his tone edged with anxiety. We have a mandate to preserve control. Without it, the Bureau might as well be a circus. Eliza Quill leaned forward, her ink-stained fingers tapping lightly against the table. Harold, control doesn't have to mean rigidity. Absurdity requires a framework, yes, but one that breathes. Rules that adapt rather than constrict. Think of it as a living document. Mythic smiled brightly, eyes flashing with mischief. I say let's make room for a little creative chaos. Like, imagine if unicorn parking zones had imaginative overflow areas where rules flex with the mood of the city. Carl chuckled. Ah, the infamous imaginative overflow might just be the clause that saves us all from bureaucratic doom. Harold's brow furrowed, but there was a flicker of curiosity beneath his usual rigidity. As Carl outlined proposals for flexible clauses, allowing creative interpretations, conditional exemptions for unpredictable phenomena, and adaptive guidelines that could evolve with the city's absurdity of slow transformation began to take hold. Minutes turned to hours as the clerks debated, argued, and occasionally laughed. Myra's exuberance injected a lightness that counterbalanced Harold's meticulous caution. Eliza acted as mediator, her pragmatic yet open-minded approach smoothing tensions with quiet wisdom. At one point, Harold hesitated before crossing out a regulation he'd defended fiercely days before. His hands trembled, slightly a rare crack in his composed facade. Eliza met his gaze steadily, offering silent encouragement. Change is difficult, but sometimes necessary, she said softly. The room's atmosphere shifted from defensive to collaborative. Mira proposed an amendment that allowed parking zones to be redefined seasonally based on the whimsical needs of the unicorn population. A suggestion initially met with incredulous stares, but eventually met with reluctant nods. Her laughter, bright and infectious, broke the tension, reminding everyone that absurdity was not just a problem to manage, but a joy to embrace. Carl meticulously transcribed each agreed-upon change, his pen moving faster than ever before as the new document took shape. A blueprint for a bureau not shackled by inflexible laws, but guided by principles that honored both order and the unpredictable magic of nonsense. As the day waned, the clerks gathered their papers, their faces reflecting a mixture of accomplishment and uncertainty. The rules they'd rewritten were not a panacea, but a beginning tentative step toward a future where bureaucracy and absurdity could coexist in dynamic harmony. Outside the window, the city pulsed with its usual discordant symphony, the distant whinny of a unicorn, the hum of malfunctioning absurdity machines, the murmur of citizens filing impossible requests. The Bureau's new regulations would not tame this chaos, but channel it. A delicate dance of structure and spontaneity destined to continue. Harold paused at the door, casting one last glance at the whiteboard now filled with flexible clauses and colorful annotations. Perhaps, he murmured, there is room for a little madness within order. Eliza smiled, her eyes reflecting both relief and anticipation. And a little order within madness, she replied, as they stepped back into the fluorescent-lit halls of the Bureau of Absurd Affairs. A newfound sense of possibility hung in the air. The rules had been rewritten, but the dance between logic and nonsense was far from over. It was only just beginning. Tomorrow, Mira whispered, sketchbook in hand, we make absurdity official. And with that promise, the Bureau moved forward uncertain, hopeful, and ever absurd.